The aim of Amber is to create films that help us to reflect on culture, society, our lives, our values. It has some pretty lofty aims. And so you might be wondering, how does coffee fit into these wonderful aims? And so I'm going to do my best to explain to you. First, we're going to brew some coffee. So we've got some water boiling here, and what I have here is a coffee brewing mechanism.
Oh wow, it's really sweet. I roasted it like 40 hours ago, so
yeah, so I just roasted this in my oven. It's really easy. Aristotle wrote a book called Physics, and then after he wrote Physics, he wrote another book, and he called it Metaphysics. And meta just kind of means beyond, and physics means physics, and he presumably just meant after physics. First, I'm going to talk about a branch of metaphysics that's called ontology, the study of being. What kinds of things exist? Do souls exist? Does God exist? Do universal properties exist? My ontological beliefs influence the way in which I think about coffee and coffee culture, and so I believe that there's actually more to reality than physical reality, that there are immaterial things that do exist, for example, consciousness. And so I believe there's other things also that are not material that we can't actually see, and I'll call these things spiritual. And so I think that there is a non-material or a spiritual reality, and that there is a dynamic interplay between the material and the spiritual, and that the material and spiritual reality are actually not two separate realities, but they are one. And one way that we come to understand the spiritual reality is through our experience in the material world, and that many of these material things serve as metaphors that help our brain, which can't comprehend the immaterial because we comprehend through our senses, that these metaphors help us to comprehend that which is immaterial. I think that our experience and our engagement with something like coffee and the pursuit of excellence, striving to really perfect something and bring it to its highest standard, has a spiritual dimension to it. And that in the process of doing that, we're actually, in a sense, tuning our souls, and that we're refining and keying our souls up to a higher note. And that it elevates us when we engage in these kinds of things and helps us to develop certain spiritual qualities. I mean, you might say, it's just coffee, it's just a cup. You're sort of almost worshiping, deifying an inanimate object. And I think that there's another way to look at it. And that way to look at it is to think about the metaphysical or the spiritual dimensions of the inanimate. I recognize that, yes, this right here is just material particles, but it, to me, represents something more. What makes us human is our ability to think, to reason. We exercise our capacity for science when we strive to understand what's happening when we brew a cup of coffee, what happens when we grow in different regions at different elevations with different plants, the different ways in which we can harvest the coffee berry impacts the different flavors that it brings out, and then the different ways in which we roast it and how different temperatures and different processes and all of these things can alter the flavor, and why does that happen? And so in this process of discovering the ways in which nature is functioning, we're uncovering the beauty and the order that has been deposited in nature. And then, and this is what truly makes us human, is that we use our consciousness, which is immaterial, and we transcend the chain of causation. We transcend the laws of nature, and we create something that animals aren't able to create. Animals don't have the ability to really perfect a beautiful cup of light roasted, fruity coffee. That's something that only humans can do. That's one of the things that makes us human. And so I think there's something really interesting about that. Maybe I'm being manipulated, but the fact that I have free will and that I'm human seems to say that, well, it's still possible.